Montana Territory, September 1873. The wind carried dust and dread across the dry yard behind the general store, where men gathered like vultures, their voices low and hungry. Annabeth Monroe stood barefoot on the wooden platform, wrists bound, dress torn at the hem. Her mouth was dry. Her heart thudded like a trapped thing. She had no family left, no coin in her pocket, and now no choice. The auctioneer, a thick-necked man with a voice like gravel, raised his hand. One working girl, 18 years, strong back, quiet, who'll start the bidding? Laughter rose from a corner. A man with tobacco-stained teeth called out, "She ain't said a word, maybe she's slow." Another voice, meaner, followed, "I'll take her for $5, put her to work in my kitchen or my bed." Annabeth stared at the crowd, her eyes wide but unseeing. She was shaking. Her breath hitched as the crowd pressed closer. Her head spun. Her knees buckled, then a voice cut through the air, quiet but firm, $10, and she walks out of here with me, not a hand laid on her. The men turned. A tall cowboy stepped forward from the shadows by the stable. His hat was low, his clothes dusted with trail dirt, and his face unreadable beneath the sun. He looked calm but ready, like a man who had seen too much and survived it anyway. The auctioneer blinked. "You serious, stranger?" The cowboy's gaze stayed locked on Annabeth. "I am. Name, Boone Ellison." A murmur passed through the crowd. The name carried weight. Boone had ridden with the Montana Stock Patrol, helped bury men after the winter raids, and once dragged a wounded settler 15 miles through snow so he would not die alone. Folks whispered about what he had lost, but no one ever questioned his word. The auctioneer shrugged. "She's yours, then." Boone stepped up to the platform. He reached out his hand but did not touch her. "You all right?" Annabeth stared at him. She could not speak. "You'll only know peace now," he said softly. "I swear it." Her legs gave out. Boone caught her before she hit the floor. She woke in the back of a wagon, wrapped in a clean blanket, the sky above her pale with dusk. The wheels bumped gently over the dirt road, and the smell of pine drifted in with the wind. Boone sat beside her, holding the reins, his jaw tight. She sat up slowly. "Where are we?" "Half a day out of town. My place is up near Elk Creek Ridge." "You'll be safe there. You bought me." "No," he said, glancing at her. "I paid to get you away. That's different." Her voice trembled. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Boone looked back at the trail ahead. "Because I remember what it feels like to lose everything." They rode in silence after that. Boone's cabin sat near a wide clearing, tucked between tall pines and a creek that ran fast with meltwater. He helped her down from the wagon without a word, then opened the door and stepped back so she could walk in first. The room was small but warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. There was one bed, a rocking chair, and shelves lined with worn books. A stewpot hung over the flames. It smelled like meat and potatoes. "You can have the bed," he said. "I will take the floor." "I cannot take your bed." He pulled off his hat and set it on the hook. "You are not taking anything. You are resting, that is all." Annabeth stood still in the center of the room. Her hands were shaking again. Boone crossed to the hearth and stirred the pot. "You hungry?" She nodded. He ladled the stew into a tin bowl and handed it to her. She sat in the rocking chair, cradling the food like it might vanish. He crouched down across from her, his hands resting on his knees. "If you want to leave in the morning, I will take you where you want, but if you stay, you are safe here. No one will touch you, no one will make you do anything." She lifted her eyes. "Why are you being kind?" Boone looked at the fire. "Because someone should have been kind to my wife." "And they were not." She said nothing. He did not explain further. Days passed slow and quiet. Annabeth helped in the garden, fed the hens, swept the porch. She did not speak much, but Boone never pressed. He worked the land during the day and built a small fence around the cabin so she could walk without looking over her shoulder. One morning she found a hair ribbon folded on the table. It was blue. Boone did not mention it, but she wore it anyway. She began to laugh again, soft and shy, when Boone told stories about a neighbor's stubborn mule. He watched her carefully, like he could not believe she was real. Then one evening, she found him outside at the fence, staring at the stars. She walked out to him. "You said you had a wife." "I did." What happened? Boone sighed. We were caught in the snows. She went out to fetch kindling, never came back. I searched for 2 days, found her boot in the river. Annabeth's fingers curled around the edge of the fence. I failed her, he said. You did not, he looked at her. How do you know? Because you do not leave people behind, not even strangers. He reached out, slow and careful, and brushed a curl from her cheek. You are not a stranger anymore. Her heart skipped, neither of them moved, then he stepped back. Good night, Annabeth. She stood there long after he went inside, heart pounding in her chest like thunder. Winter pressed in early. Snow dusted the porch. Boone brought in extra wood, hung thick blankets along the windows. He built a second chair beside the fire. One night she found him asleep at the hearth, book fallen from his hand. She pulled the blanket over him and sat beside him on the floor. For the first time in a long time she felt something like peace, and she knew she was not leaving, not now, not ever. By late November, the snow had thickened into quiet drifts, softening the world into hush and white. The creek froze at the edges. Smoke curled steady from the chimney. Inside the cabin, the air held the scent of boiled apples and pine pitch. Annabeth stood at the table sorting dried beans into a sack, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hands no longer trembling when she worked. Boone was outside mending the barn door. Something had loosened in last week's wind, and it had been groaning since. She had begun to hum when she worked, low and tuneless, like something remembered from long ago. The sound startled her sometimes, as if it came from someone else, but she didn't stop. When Boone came in, he was shaking snow from his shoulders. Barn's near done, he said, hanging his coat by the stove. I'll finish the hinges in the morning. Frost's setting in faster than I thought. She looked up. There's a storm coming, by the feel of it and the way the crows have gone quiet. We'll want to bring in the chickens tonight just in case. She nodded, wiping her hands. I'll help. Boone hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. Got something for you if you're willing. She tilted her head, uncertain. He pulled out a thin book worn at the spine. It's a collection of folk tales, old ones. Found it in the wagon when I went to trade flour. Thought you might want something to pass the hours. Annabeth took it gingerly, her fingers brushing his. The pages were yellowed, but the ink still held. I haven't read since. Before, she said softly, not finishing the sentence. Boone didn't press. You don't have to, just thought it might be good to have. She ran her thumb over the cover. Thank you. That night, she sat beside the hearth with the book open in her lap, the firelight catching in her hair. Boone carved something small at the table, his knife tapping lightly against the wood. Neither spoke much. The silence between them had taken on a shape, comfortable and lived in. The wind picked up after midnight. Boone rose twice to check the windows. Each time Annabeth watched him from the bed, her eyes just barely open. On the third time he paused beside her. You cold? He asked. She shook her head. No, just listening. He nodded and pulled another quilt over her. His hand lingered at the edge of the blanket, then withdrew. By morning, the world outside had vanished beneath a white shroud. The fences were half buried, and the barn roof sagged under the weight. Boone shoveled a narrow path to the henhouse and returned with straw in his beard and a stiff gait from the cold. Annabeth met him at the door. Come sit, she said. Your hands look near frozen. He let her tug him toward the chair. She poured hot water into a basin and pressed his hands into it. He winced, then let out a breath. You take care of everyone but yourself, she said, kneeling beside him. Boone gave a quiet huff. It's easier that way. She looked up at him. Maybe, but not fair. He didn't reply, just watched her fingers as they dried his hands with a cloth. The moment stretched, thick with something neither of them could name yet. Later, while he chopped firewood, Annabeth found the small carving he'd been working on. It was a bird, unfinished, its wings just starting to take shape. She ran her thumb along the edge, then tucked it back into the drawer where he'd left it. That evening, after supper, they sat by the fire again, closer this time. Boone reached into the drawer, hesitated, then handed her the bird. I was making it for the windowsill, thought it might keep company with the light. She turned it over in her palm. It's beautiful. He gave a small nod. It's not done, still, she said. I like it. Thunder rolled far off, muffled by the snow. Boone leaned back, legs stretched toward the fire. "What did you want before all this?" he asked, voice low. She looked into the flames. "A little shop, sewing, mending. Maybe a sign with my name on it. You good with a needle?" Enough to patch a man's coat and not have it fall apart in the rain. He smiled, a flicker across his face. "That's more than I can say for myself." She rested the wooden bird in her lap. "What about you?" Boone's eyes stayed on the fire. "I wanted land, not much, just enough to raise beef and never answer to another man's temper. You've got it now." His mouth tightened slightly. "Took longer than I thought." They sat quiet a long while. Snow tapped against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. When she rose to stoke the fire, he caught her wrist gently. "I meant what I said that day in town, about peace." She looked at him, eyes wide but steady. "I know," she said. "I believe you." He let go, but his hand hovered near hers before he drew it back. Neither of them said another word that night. But when she went to sleep, the wooden bird sat on the windowsill, watching the snow drift down like a promise. Come mid-December, the air grew sharper, biting through wool and leather alike. The creek had stopped running altogether, locked beneath its own silence. Boone's boots left crisp prints in the snow each morning, and Annabeth began rising early enough to make coffee before he did. She never said it aloud, but he noticed the warmth waiting for him and the way she folded the tin cup in both hands when she passed it over. One morning, he returned from the shed with a coil of rope and a small satchel. "I'm riding out to the Jensen homestead," he said, tugging on his gloves. "They're laid up with sickness, asked for salt and dry onions. I'll be back before dark." Annabeth bit her lip. "It's a long ride in this weather." Boone met her eyes. "They helped me once. I owe them." She nodded and handed him a strip of jerky wrapped in cloth. "You'll need something for the trail." He took it and paused. "If I'm not back by sundown, don't wait. Lock the door. Keep the rifle nearby." "I will." He hesitated again, then reached out and touched her shoulder just for a moment. "You've got good sense." The door closed quiet behind him. She spent the day patching the lining of his winter coat, needles slipping through thick cloth with practiced steadiness. The rhythm eased the quiet in her chest. Outside, the wind made the trees groan. When dusk came and Boone had not returned, she lit both oil lamps and placed them in the window. Then she loaded the rifle and kept it within reach, though her hands remained steady. He arrived just after moonrise, face raw from wind, his horse lathered and trembling. She stepped out onto the porch before he could knock. "Jensen's alive," he said, voice hoarse. "Boy had fever. Gave them what I had." She guided him inside without a word, pulled off his coat, and placed both his hands around the steaming mug already waiting on the table. "Thank you," he said, after a long silence. She sat across from him, watching the frost melt from his lashes. "You'd have done it even if they hadn't asked, likely." He gave a faint shake of the head. "Fever took my brother when I was a boy, never forgot the sound of it." Annabeth looked down at her hands. "I've never heard you speak of family before." Boone leaned back, letting the heat work into his bones. "We were 5, me, my brother, and 3 sisters. Plague took 2, fire took the house. My father drank himself into the ground by the next winter. After that, it was just me and the land." She didn't speak for a long time. "Then you've carried a lot." He looked at her then, not away, and his voice came quiet. "So have you." That night, when he moved to take the floor, she stopped him. "There's room," she said, not looking at him. "And it's too cold to be proud." He hesitated only a moment before settling on the far edge of the bed, careful not to shift the covers too much. They lay there in silence, breath visible in the air, inches between them and a world of things unspoken. "In the dark," she whispered, "when I was taken from my uncle's farm, I didn't think I'd ever sleep without fear again." Boone didn't move, but his voice came steady. "What they did to you, what they meant to do, none of it was your fault. I know that now. I didn't before." The wind howled outside. He turned his head toward her. "You're not alone anymore, Annabeth." She didn't answer, but after a long stretch of quiet, she reached for his hand beneath the quilt. He didn't flinch. By morning, their fingers were still laced together. They didn't speak of it, but something between them had shifted. Boone began carving new fence posts in the evenings, measuring twice, then handing her the pencil when he was through. She began baking once a week, kneading dough with her sleeves rolled high, flour dusting her cheeks. One afternoon, a doe wandered close to the yard. Annabeth stood at the window as it moved through the trees, its breath rising in soft clouds. "She's not afraid," she said. Boone stepped beside her. "She's watching. She wants to know if this is a safe place." Annabeth turned toward him. "Is it?" His eyes stayed on hers. "It is now." She didn't look away. "I want to stay, not just because I owe you, but because I feel—" She stopped, searching. "You don't have to explain," Boone's voice was low, "but if you stay, it's your home too. Not mine with you in it." She reached out and took his hand again, this time without hesitation. "Then let's build something that lasts." Boone nodded once, firm as bedrock. That night they sat shoulder to shoulder before the fire, and when she leaned her head against his arm, he pressed a kiss to her hair, slow and sure. The snow outside kept falling, but inside the cabin, the quiet held warmth. The thaw arrived slow, the way healing did quiet, unnoticed until one morning the eaves dripped steady and the trees creaked without groaning. Mud tracked in from the path Boone walked each day to check the traps he'd set deeper in the ridge. It clung to his boots in heavy clumps. Annabeth made a place by the door for them, a square of burlap and a bent tin pan for melting snow. One afternoon, she stood at the edge of the clearing, sleeves rolled to the elbow, mending a broken hinge on the henhouse door. Her braids swung down her back, dark against her homespun blouse. Boone watched her from the porch with a length of twine in his hand, half tied and forgotten. "You always work like you mean it," he said finally. She didn't look up. "Work doesn't ask questions, it just waits to be done." Boone stepped down into the yard, stopping beside her. "That hinge been crooked since the summer I built it. You're fixing what I never got around to." She set the hammer down and wiped her hands on her skirt. "You built a whole life out of what hurt you. That's more than most manage." Boone crouched beside the door, checking her repair by hand. "You've got an eye for things that need setting right." She tilted her chin toward him. "When everything's been wrong once, you learn how to see it coming." Boone stood slowly. "I'd like to show you something. If you're not too tired." She followed him through the trees behind the cabin, past the trap line and down a slope she hadn't walked before. The sun was low, casting gold through the bare branches. They came to a small rise where the trees opened to a view of the valley below. A stream wound through it, swollen now with meltwater, and on the far side a patch of turned soil waited under a canvas tarp. "I cleared it last summer," Boone said. "Wasn't ready to plant then. Figured I'd try corn, maybe oats. Could run an irrigation ditch off the stream." Annabeth stepped closer to the edge. "You waiting on something?" He met her gaze. "I was waiting on someone." The wind stirred her skirt, carried the faint scent of cedar and earth. She looked down at the field again. "That land will take time," she said. "I've got time now." She didn't answer at first. "Then I can sow grain sacks, and I've a steady hand for thinning rows." Boone's breath caught just a little. "Then it's ours." They walked back slow, not saying much, but the distance between them had changed. The silence wasn't filled with caution anymore. It had weight, but not the kind you carry alone. That night, Annabeth unfolded a length of linen she'd been saving. "I was going to stitch a sign once," she said. "For the shop I never opened." Boone sat across from her, his elbows on the table. "What would it have said?" Monroe mending. "Simple, but honest." He nodded toward the linen. "You could still make it. Hang it right by the door." She looked at the cabin wall, rough-hewn and solid. "This isn't a shop." "No," he said. "It's a home." She laid the fabric flat, smoothing it with both hands. "Then I'll sew something that fits." Boone rose and took the candle over to her side of the table. "You want light, you shouldn't have to ask for it." She set her needle to the cloth. "I never thought I'd belong to anything again." Boone didn't sit back down. He stayed beside her, one hand resting on the edge of the table. "You don't belong to anyone," he said. "But this place belongs to you now, as much as it ever did to me." She didn't lift her eyes, but her fingers stilled. "Then I'll make it better. I'll mend what I can." He leaned down and pressed his lips to her temple, careful and sure. "You already have." The fire burned low in the hearth. Outside, the thawed earth drank deep, and the field below waited for planting. Inside, the air held the scent of pine smoke and something new, something softly blooming, steady as spring. By the time the frost left the topsoil for good, Boone had plowed the field with a borrowed mule and a rusted blade he'd sharpened by hand. He worked by light from the rising sun, sweat darkening the back of his shirt before noon, while Annabeth walked the furrow lines dropping seed from a leather pouch she'd stitched from scraps. Her hands were firm and unhurried, her pace steady. She didn't speak much as they worked, but Boone didn't need her to. One afternoon, while they rested under the cottonwoods near the stream, Boone passed her a tin flask of water and sat down in the shade beside her. "I sent for something," he said, watching the current move around the rocks. "It'll take a few weeks to come in by freight." Annabeth sipped, then passed the flask back. "Something for the farm," he shook his head once. "For you, a Singer needle shuttle. Saw one in the store ledger last time I was in town. Figured it might suit a woman who can stitch linen without looking down." She tilted her head. "You've done enough." "I haven't," Boone said, voice low. "Not yet." Annabeth looked at the stream, fingers brushing the grass beside her knee. "I don't know how to live easy. I only ever learned how to keep moving." "You don't have to change that," Boone said. "Just don't do it alone." She studied his face then, the lines at the corners of his mouth, the way his eyes didn't flick away when she met them. A quiet passed between them too deep for words, the kind that settled into the marrow. The next Sunday, Boone hitched up the wagon and drove her into town. The trip was quiet but not solemn. They passed between stands of birch just beginning to leaf, and Annabeth rested her hand on the sideboard as they rode. At the mercantile, Boone handed her a folded paper. "Your name's on the account now. If you need anything, you don't wait for me." She unfolded it slowly. "You're trusting me with all of it. I wouldn't have brought you here if I didn't." Inside, Mrs. Laramie, the shopkeeper's wife, approached with a careful smile. "Miss Monroe, I heard you were keeping house up at the Ellison place." Annabeth didn't look away. "I'm not keeping house. I'm building it." Mrs. Laramie blinked, then nodded once. "Glad to hear it." Boone didn't say a word, but when they left, he offered his hand to help her up into the wagon. She took it without looking down. Later that week, Annabeth dug a narrow bed beside the porch and planted marigold seed from a pouch she'd kept hidden in her trunk. She didn't tell Boone what she was doing, and he didn't ask. But each morning, he glanced toward the soil before saddling the mule. One night, as rain tapped against the roof, Annabeth sat beside Boone with a piece of muslin stretched across her lap. Her needle moved in measured arcs, threading color into shape. "What's it going to be?" he asked. She didn't look up. "A name." He leaned closer. "Yours, ours." Boone was quiet a long time then. "I asked the preacher to come by next week if you'd want it that way." Annabeth set the cloth down gently. "I would." She reached for his hand, and this time he didn't have to wait for the part where she leaned in. They married in the clearing behind the cabin, under the same cottonwoods where they'd first spoken of planting. The preacher brought his wife along, and she wept quietly through the vows. Boone wore a clean collar, and Annabeth pinned a sprig of wild mint to her blouse. There was no music, but after the words were said and the sun began to settle behind the ridge, Boone took her hand and danced with her anyway, slow and without steps, her head tucked against his shoulder. That night, with the door bolted and the fire low, Boone folded her into his arms beneath the quilt she had pieced over long evenings. Her hand rested over the place his heart beat slow and steady. "I never expected any of this," she whispered. He kissed her forehead, his voice rough. "I didn't expect to want again, but I do. I want everything." They slept with the windows open, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and new growth. Seasons turned. The field gave them corn and squash, enough to trade and enough to keep. The creek ran full through the spring and never dried. Annabeth kept her sign tucked in the drawer Monroe mending, but never needed to hang it. Folks came to her anyway, for stitching and advice, and sometimes just to sit quiet by the fire. Boone built a second room onto the cabin by hand, and when she told him her courses hadn't come in nearly 2 months, he only reached for her hand and nodded once. Their son was born the next March, with gray eyes like his father and a cry that filled the rafters. Boone held him like he'd been born knowing how. They named him Illy, after the brother Boone had lost, years past, marked by the rhythm of planting and birth and harvest. The marigolds by the porch came back each spring without coaxing. The wooden bird still sat on the sill, its wings unfinished, but no one minded. Some things were meant to become, not end. Boone and Annabeth grew old side by side, their love a quiet strength, woven into each corner of the life they built. They never spoke of the years before the cabin, not because they forgot, but because those years no longer owned them. They belonged to each other now and always would.